Unit 6, The Return to the Land, under Ezra and Nehemiah. So as we return to our timeline, we just covered two very important events in the nation of Israel's history, the Assyrian dispersion and the Babylonian captivity, two hugely important events that we'll cover in depth in part 2. But as we go down the timeline, again, as now we're into the Persian Empire, there is no Israel. They've been in captivity in Babylon for 70 years. The north has been dispersed for much longer than that. And now we see this event that we call the return to the land. And so this is a super important event that, of course, happens. And so after 70 years in Babylonian captivity, the Jews now get to return again to the land that God had promised them. And this takes place in 3 separate waves, which were led by Ezra and Nehemiah. So the people are out of the land, and so they're going to get now to return to the land. So Ezra first leads 50,000 Jews back into the land to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And that's the first thing that we see happen. We see that, of course, in the book of Ezra. After that, he leads another 1,500 back into the land and institutes a much-needed social reform that needs to happen as people take over the land again. And then we see Nehemiah, who, of course, rebuilds the walls of the temple there in Jerusalem. So that happens during the Persian Empire, and we see also that there are these last 3 prophets that are significant. They are, of course, Malachi, Haggai, and Zechariah. And the words of Malachi are actually the end of the Old Testament. They are the last words of the Bible. In fact, Malachi says these are the final words of the Old Testament. He says, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse." And that's how the Old Testament ends. And so the words of Malachi are the last prophetic words that happen for 400 years, because after this, as we go down the timeline, a number of empires come and go, but there are no prophets during this time. It's prophetic silence. And that is, of course, until we read about this one. "For this is he," it says in Matthew 3:3, "who was spoken of by the prophet Isaiah, saying, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, saying, prepare the way of the Lord, make his paths straight." That is, of course, speaking of this character, John the Baptist, who is the final prophet of the Old Covenant. And, of course, his role is to transition, like Samuel's role was to transition into the time of kings. John the Baptist's role is to transition to, of course, the arrival of the King of Kings, and that is Jesus of Nazareth, the Messiah, the Redeemer, the King himself. So that is how that's what we're going to cover in part 2. So here's another quick review of the events of part 2, the 12 major events of the nation of Israel, culminating in the arrival of the Messiah. But we can also see how all of these events that happened previously all connect together to create the stage so that when Jesus arrives, his impact is unmistakable and beautiful. I don't know how else to say it. So, but anyways, this is where we're going in part 2. So I just can't thank you enough for hanging with me and for going through part 1. This is where we're going next. So if you're interested, if you want to hang with me, I invite you to register, get in, and let's do part 2 together. And so with that, I bid you adieu. I will see you in part 2 as we cover from the time of the kings to the Messiah. Thank you so much for your time. I pray that this course is a blessing to you. We're not even close to done. We're just getting started. So if you would, I invite you to join me in part 2 of the Complete Bible Overview.